So I'm just starting the YouTube link as well. So people who are joining on YouTube can see the webinar there. They can also post questions there. I can see Dr. Nitin More has also joined us. Welcome, Nitin.
Mm,
Nitin again was with us in TMH and now is
yeah.
in Dubai. I think I don't remember. We met in Hyderabad last. Okay, so we are live on YouTube as well now. So I'm just starting the YouTube link as well. Let me just so people who are just okay. All right, we are all set. So once more people join, I'll just do the housekeeping announcements as well. So we have more familiar names joining. Mangesh Patil has also joined from. Oh, Dr. Sharmila has also joined along with
Sharmila
Dr.
has joined.
Mangesh. Um, Now, in spite of being in Bombay, we don't get to see each other or meet each other, unfortunately. Dr. Bindu Joseph has also joined from Bangalore.
I can
Welcome,
see
Dr. Bindu.
Sunita. Punita also is there.
Yeah. And Dr. Chinmay has joined. I don't know if it is the same Chinmay, but Chinmay Gavath also happens to be a friend of mine. I hope it is the same Chinmay. You can't see faces on here. So,
Rupal, I can see Rupal.
Rupal is also there. So we have around, I think, 300 all registrations. So some of them will join on YouTube, some of them will join on Zoom, and some of them will not join, and they will see the webinar later. Maybe we'll send them a link. Okay. Okay, so we're going to record this webinar so that we use it as an academic resource later. So it's 5 o'clock and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining on this webinar. My name is Dr. Prasad Raj Dandekar. I'm a radiation oncologist based in Mumbai. I work at the Reliance Foundation Hospital in Mumbai. This is the fourth webinar that we are doing, and it wasn't supposed to start as a series, but it has almost become a series. And the idea behind this webinar is to pick a problem that is an actual clinical problem, which we are facing day to day in our clinic, and get the best of the experts to answer those questions that we may have. So my aim has always been to find a very narrow clinical problem and try and get the most deep answers that we can get out of this webinar. So today we are going to talk about dysphagia optimized IMRT, and I'm really pleased to welcome both the speakers on this topic. The first speaker is Dr. Srirang Bhide. Dr. Bhide is a consultant clinical oncologist in the head and neck unit of the Royal Marsden Hospital. He's obviously has an excellent academic record. He was also actively involved in the Passport trial, which all of us it's a very important landmark trial in head and neck radiation oncology. He works with Dr. Professor Chris Nutting and his group. And I've had a pleasure of working with Shri when I was a head and neck fellow in Marsden many years ago. So welcome, Shri. And the second speaker is, of course, Dr. Ashwini Budrukar, and I don't need to introduce you to Dr. Ashwini Budrukar. Everybody in radiation oncology in India knows her. Dr. Ashwini is a professor in Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai, and she's very passionate about head and neck cancers. And I'm really happy that Dr. Ashwini is preserving the art of brachytherapy in India, which unfortunately seems to be getting lost. So she's one of the most important experts in head and neck brachytherapy. So welcome, Dr. Ashwini.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
So a little bit of suggestions to all our participants that whatever questions you have, we request you to post them in the Q&A box. So when we are done with the presentations, we'll be taking those questions and the speakers will answer those questions. And we'll take questions from YouTube as well. So people who have questions and are seeing it on YouTube can post their questions as comments and we'll take it from there. So without wasting further time, I invite Dr. Srirang Bhide to start his presentation. Over to you, Sri.
Thank you very much, Prasad. And can everyone see my? Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see your screen. Sure.
So sorry, just give me 1 minute. Right, so I'm going to discuss or talk about the results of the DAR study, which was a randomized phase 3 study conducted in the UK to look at the benefits of dysphagia optimized IMRT in terms of patients' quality of life following treatment. And I'm presenting this data or some of the slides that are included in the presentation on behalf of all the study investigators. And the chief investigator on the study was Professor Chris Nutting at the Royal Marsden Hospital. So cancers of the pharynx are one of the commonest subset of head and neck cancers that we see. And chemoradiation is an important treatment modality, and patients will end up having chemoradiotherapy at some point in their treatment. Chemoradiation results in persistent swallowing dysfunction and altered quality of life. And particularly, this is an issue for HPV-related oropharyngeal cancers, where the patients survive for a long time, and therefore late swallowing is an important factor. So we can use IMRT to spare organs at risk, such as the constrictor muscles, which are important in swallowing. And this was proven by the group at University of Michigan and has been published in the JCO. So the hypothesis for the DAR study was that dysphagia optimized IMRT reduces dose to the constrictor muscles and would improve swallowing function compared to standard IMRT. And the study protocol is published in BMC Cancer, and that is the reference if you want to look it up. So this was a parallel phase 3 multi-center randomized study, and the trial schema is seen on your right side. And the study involved rigorous radiotherapy quality assurance to make sure that the target delineation was done to standard. And I think Dr. Budrukkar is going to discuss target delineation in detail later on. And we also did a significant quality assurance program for speech and language therapists nationally, so that the video fluoroscopy was done to high standard. So the main inclusion criteria were patients undergoing chemoradiotherapy or radiotherapy with a radical intent for cancers of the oropharynx and hypopharynx. And they were required to have bilateral neck irradiation, be it to a prophylactic dose. And those were the staging criteria for inclusion. The main exclusion criteria were pre-existing swallowing dysfunction and posterior pharyngeal wall involvement or involvement of the retropharyngeal node, which meant that these structures had to be included in the high dose volume, and the constrictor sparing would not be feasible. Any previous surgery was an exclusion criteria, and the primary endpoint was difference in mean MD Anderson dysphagia inventory, which is a standardized, validated patient-reported questionnaire. So the main endpoint was measured at 12 months. The key secondary endpoints are listed here, and some of them are patient-reported, while some of them are objective assessments. Locoregional tumor control and overall survival was also tested, as this is quite important. So one of the key aspects, like I said, is radiotherapy planning. So obviously all patients had CT scan in a shell, and we also mandated an MRI scan done simultaneously in the shell or on the same day. And these were fused to improve the gross tumor volume delineation. And as you can see here, the GTV is delineated at the primary site and the lymph node. Oops. Sorry. Prasad? Can you see my? Can you? Oh, sorry. Yeah. And then, so with radiotherapy planning, following GTV delineation, we added a centimeter isotropically to give us CTV1, which would receive the high dose volume. And this was edited of the bone and air where necessary. And then the CTV2, or the elective nodal volume, was delineated as per the published guidelines by Gregoire group. The pharyngeal constrictors were outlined. So we outlined two groups of pharyngeal constrictors. So one was a combined volume for superior and middle pharyngeal constrictor, and the second one was inferior pharyngeal constrictor. And the guidelines that we used have been published, and we combined the guidelines to have a trial-specific guidelines for constrictor outlining. And this shows you the constrictor outline, the superior constrictor muscle, CTV1 in red and CTV2 in blue. And we set some mandatory dose constraints for pharyngeal constrictor muscle sparing for dysphagia optimized IMRT. And we only attempted to spare the constrictor muscle outside the high dose target volume. And for oropharyngeal cancers, the constraints were the superior and middle pharyngeal constrictor receive less than 50 gray, and the inferior receive less than 20 gray. For hypopharyngeal cancer, it was less than 40 gray for the superior constrictor and less than 50 gray for the inferior pharyngeal constrictor. So this is what a dysphagia optimized IMRT plan looked like. So as you can see here, that's elective nodal volume, and we accepted compromise where we wanted to spare the constrictor muscles. So the dose here was much lower than the prescribed 54 gray in 30 fractions to the elective nodal volume. And this gives you illustration at various dose levels where we've spared the constrictor muscle to less than superior constrictor muscle here to less than 50 gray. So in terms of statistical considerations, we had 102 patients, and this is in order to detect a 10-point improvement in the patient-reported MDADI composite score. And we recruited 112 patients between June 2016 and April 2018. And this is a data snapshot taken around the 1st of May. So these are the patient characteristics. So as you can see, the patients are well balanced in terms of gender. Majority of the patients in this study had oropharyngeal cancer, because in the UK, the incidence of oropharyngeal cancer is much, much higher than hypopharyngeal cancer. As you can see, majority of them received concomitant chemotherapy, and induction chemotherapy was given in minority of the patient. Most of the patients received 2 cycles of cisplatin at a dose of 100 milligram per meter square at week 1 and 4. And carboplatin was given where we saw patients experiencing cisplatin-induced toxicity during treatment. So in terms of the doses, so as you can see, the dose to the high dose volume, which was 65 gray in 30 fractions, was consistent across both the arms of the study, and as was the elective dose volume. One important fact to note here is the plan PTV4 does not exclude the pharyngeal constrictor muscle volume. So this is the dose that was delivered to the area lying outside the pharyngeal constrictor volume. And as you can see, in the dysphagia optimized IMRT arm, we were able to spare the dose to the inferior constrictor and also the superior constrictor group below the mandatory dose constraint we had set. So because majority of the patients here are oropharyngeal cancer, we've achieved the constraint for superior pharyngeal constrictor. Now, in terms of the main primary endpoint of MDADI composite square at 12 months, you can see 7.2 difference between dysphagia optimized IMRT and standard IMRT, which was statistically significant and indicates better swallowing function at 12 months following completion of treatment. And then as expected, or as you see in majority of the patients, there was no difference in the scores in the 2 arms at 6 months, as we were measuring late dysphagia, and it takes a gradual improvement. And you can see the 7-point difference at 12 months following treatment. When we look at objective domains that we assessed, these were assessed by a speech and language therapist, going first to normalcy of diet. So a domain score of greater than 50 represent good performance. And if you look here, there is a 12-point improvement in normalcy of diet as assessed objectively in patients who had dysphagia sparing IMRT. And there is a 16-point advantage at having greater than 90% normalcy of swallowing at 12 months. Looking at the other domains of the PSS, which is eating in public, again, there is a 10% or 10-point difference between, or 10% difference between the standard IMRT arm and dysphagia IMRT arm. And there was no difference in speech in between the 2 arms. We also measured patient-reported University of Washington Quality of Life questionnaire, again, which is a standardized questionnaire. And if you look at swallowing function, you can see a 25% improvement compared to standard IMRT when you spare the constrictor muscles. So in terms of the recurrences and death, we saw 3 recurrences in total. And as I've said, majority of the patients were HPV positive oropharyngeal cancers. And we did not see any recurrence in the spared pharyngeal constrictor muscles in the DO-IMRT arm. All of the recurrences in the high dose volume. And these are the figures for the distant recurrences and deaths in both the arms. So in conclusion, this randomized phase 3 trial proves that sparing of the pharyngeal constrictors using IMRT significantly reduced the radiation dose to the constrictor muscle. And this resulted in an improvement in both patient-reported and objective swallowing measures. And this is the first randomized study to demonstrate functional benefit of dysphagia sparing IMRT and supports a new standard of care for head and neck cancer patients. And once again, we had limited number of hypopharyngeal cancer patients. So this mainly probably applies to patients with oropharyngeal cancer. And I would like to acknowledge all the study investigators and the funding bodies for this study. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Shri. I'll just yeah, thank you, Shri, for this wonderful presentation. And I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions around this because it's quite new for all of us. Even I was a little taken aback by the boldness with which you have done this study. So now I would like to invite Ashwini to give us a perspective of how do we sort of look at the Indian perspective, and can we really implement these sorts of findings, or do we need to tailor make it for Indian patients? Over to you, Ashwini.
Good afternoon, everyone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the ways and means of how we are going to do this dysphagia optimized radiotherapy and how we are going to do the swallowing evaluation, because as I understand, this topic is very new for Indian scenario, and majority of us see slightly more bulky patients, patients with bulky tumors, and therefore this kind of dysphagia sparing may be difficult. So I'm going to focus more on that, and we'll also discuss about a small study that we have done. So as we have seen that dysphagia is a major concern post CTRT, and around 50% of the patients present with dysphagia after concurrent chemoradiotherapy. And almost 1/3 of them have a risk of developing aspiration pneumonia. And in various studies, the death due to aspiration ranges from 20 to 60%. So there have been various studies in the past, and they have evaluated swallowing function using various tools such as BFS, Head Neck Quality of Life Questionnaire, University of Washington Quality of Life Questionnaire, and modified barium swallow. And all of them have found that there is dysfunction that happens post radiotherapy, and the dysphagia rates range from 12% to 30%, while the aspiration rates, they range from 30 to 40%. And also there is around 8 to 10% patients who develop a stricture. There has been study from our own hospital by Dr. Agarwal et al., where we had evaluated patients pre-RT as well as post-RT with MBS in the past. And what we observed that before even giving radiation, around 20% of the patients do have aspiration on MBS. And this, I think, is quite important because we generally have not been evaluating this in our routine clinical practice. So there has been a large study from the SEER database, and they have evaluated around 16,000 patients of head neck cancers who were treated over a period of a decade. And what they observed was that around almost 45% of the patients develop dysphagia at some point of time, and almost 2/3 of those dysphagic patients, they develop pneumonia, and this appears to be quite high. And around 10% of the patients also develop stricture. So these are a very important finding and are of major concern, because we have a lot of head and neck cancer, and this appears to be a very big problem. So which are the patients who are at highest risk? And what they observed was that those patients who receive concurrent chemoradiotherapy, there are these black bars, they have highest uh, rates of dysphagia, stricture, as well as pneumonia. And and patients who had oropharyngeal cancer, they have more of dysphagia, and those who had laryngeal cancer, they had more of pneumonia. So these findings are also very important when we are evaluating patients and are following them up. So this is more for the students and to explain what how, about the swallowing. And swallowing, as we all know, is a very complex process which involves voluntary and involuntary muscles. There are around 30 pair of muscles and multiple nerves which are involved. And there are main four phases, which include oral preparatory phase, oral phase, laryngeal phase, and esophageal phase. And the dysfunction in any of them can lead to dysphagia as well as aspiration. So what happens post radiotherapy is that in the routine mechanism, there is decrease in the posterior inversion of the base of the tongue towards the pharyngeal wall. There can be decreased elevation of the hyoid bone and larynx. The inversion of the epiglottis may also get affected, which may lead to incomplete closure of the epiglottis as well as larynx. There can be decreased peristaltic movement. There can be poor synchronization of the muscle. And these all, there may also be a delayed opening of the esophageal sphincter, and all of them can lead to dysphagia as well as aspiration. So the mechanism of radiation induced dysphagia can either be acute or late, and acute is mainly due to damage to the mucosa, soft tissue, mucositis, edema of the soft tissues, pain and the secretions which are there, as well as xerostomia. While in the late sequelae, it is essentially due to fibrosis, atrophy of the muscle, loss of sensations that happens, and lymphedema and decreased contractility. So in which patient should we do evaluation for dysphagia? Ideally, all patients who are going for organ preservation approach should undergo evaluation of dysphagia pre and post RT. But essentially, whenever you see a patient who has inability to control the food, liquid or saliva in the oral cavity, there is pocketing of the food in the cheek, or there is excess chewing before swallowing, or there is drooling, coughing, choking, or there is a wet voice after swallowing. These are some of the, and a patient himself is complaining of difficulty swallowing, nasal regurgitation. These are some of the some of the symptoms which which tells you that there is a need for evaluation of dysphagia. So how do you do the evaluation for dysphagia? And as discussed by Dr. Bide, there are various methods to do it. And in their study, they have used mainly patient reported outcomes. There are also clinician reported outcomes which we are aware of, and patient reported outcome include head neck EORTC QLQ, MD Anderson dysphagia inventory, swallowing performance status scale, and functional swallow outcome scale. While objective evaluation include 100 ml water swallow test. 100 ml water swallow test is one of the very simple method, and I think it is very much suitable, especially taking into account the Indian scenario where you may not have sophisticated machinery for modified barium swallow and fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing. So what is done in 100 ml swallow test is you give 100 ml water to patient in front of you and ask him or her to swallow the water, and you evaluate the patient for any drooling, any symptoms of cough, or any clearing of throat after the swallowing, which will suggest that patient has problems in swallowing, and those who have can be considered for further evaluation using more sophisticated methods like video fluoroscopy or fiber optic endoscopic evaluation. So what is modified barium swallow or video fluoroscopy? Video fluoroscopy is a fluoroscopic imaging of swallowing. It studies all the four phases of swallowing, and it is performed using three barium feeds. which is either a thick barium, wherein the barium suspension and barium powder are given in 1:1 ratio, medium barium, which is given as barium suspension alone, or thin barium, which is barium suspension and water in 1:2 proportion. And these consistencies are similar to solid, semi-solid, and liquid. And what is done is that you do fluoroscopic evaluation, and this is done at a rate of 30 frames per second. And when the patient is swallowing, the fluoroscopy is on, and you are able to see how the patient is swallowing and whether the swallow is functional or not. So how is the evaluation done for this, and what information do we get? The information that we get from modified barium swallow is whether patient is having penetration. What is penetration? Is basically the bolus is entering into the air cavity, but it is above the level of the vocal cords. Aspiration is a phenomena when the fluid passes, when the material passes below the level of the vocal cord, and there can be just pharyngeal residue that the bolus remains inside the vallecula or PFS, and this later on can lead to aspiration after swallowing. So these all things are evaluated on a 8-point scale, which is called as penetration aspiration scale. And essentially, one is there is no problem and everything is going properly. And 2 to 5 is penetration, wherein the material is going into the airway, but above the level of vocal cord at various levels, while 6 to 8 is aspiration, wherein the material is going below the level of the vocal cord at different levels. So these are the examples of penetration, and here you can see that the barium is going inside into the larynx, but is above the level of the vocal cords. While in this, you can see that the material is going below the larynx and is directly into the trachea, and this is a clear-cut sign of aspiration. Fiber-optic endoscopic evaluation is the endoscopic evaluation, and it evaluates essentially base of the tongue, epiglottis, larynx, and hypopharynx. And you can evaluate the anatomy as well as physiology of swallowing with this procedure. And similar to the MBS, we give solid, semi-solid, and liquid, and colored food is given to identify whether the food is going into the into the airway and below the level of the vocal cord. And similar to the MBS, you can also detect penetration, aspiration, and residue. So what's the difference between FEES and VFS is that in FEES, you are not able to see the oral and the early oropharyngeal phase, because when the scope is passed, you are seeing from the level of the base of the tongue to below. So you are not able to see the previous phases in the FEES as compared to that of the VFS. So let us look at this case capsule. So this is a 64-year-old male who presented with change in the voice, and on CT scan, he had a growth which was 3.1 into 2.3 into 1.2 centimeter on the false chord, true chord, and anterior commissure with paraglottic space extension. He was diagnosed as CA vocal cord T3N0M0 and was treated with IMRT with concurrent cisplatin to a dose of 70 gray in 35 fractions. So this is a one-year VFS of this patient, and here you can see that patient is making some effort in swallowing. He has to bend while he is swallowing, but he is able to swallow the food properly and nothing is going into his airway. But if you look at the 2-year follow-up of this patient, he is not only making the effort to swallow, but the whole some of the barium is going directly into the larynx, and you can see this, it is lining over onto the trachea. So this is a case of a dysfunctional larynx, and patient was advised laryngectomy for the dysfunctional larynx. However, patient did not agree for the same, and he presented with aspiration pneumonia, which required a very prolonged ICU admission. So this is what we have to avoid, and we have to make an attempt to reduce this complication as much as possible. So what are the ways to do it? So methods to reduce the swallowing function are prophylactic swallowing exercises and DAS optimize IMRT. So prophylactic swallowing exercises are set of exercises which are taught in detail by the swallowing therapist, and all patients with organ preservation approach should go to the speech and swallowing therapist for evaluation, and they will teach them the swallowing exercises which patient is supposed to do even during radiotherapy. Uh, about the dysphagia and aspiration related structures, uh, these were developed. Eisbruch et al. They first did the study in 26 patients, wherein they did various evaluations such as video fluoroscopy, endoscopy, and CT scan imaging pre and post radiotherapy, and they looked at abnormalities on each of them, and they found out the changes in the muscles pre-radiotherapy and post-radiotherapy, and they correlated these changes with the findings on the video fluoroscopy and the CT scan, and identified muscles which are responsible for dysphagia and aspiration, and these they termed as dysphagia aspiration related structure. So as shown by Dr. Bide, these are the structures which include superior constrictor, middle constrictor, inferior constrictor, cricopharyngeus muscle, esophageal inlet, cervical esophagus, base of the tongue, supraglottic larynx, and glottic larynx. So there are guidelines for delineation, and these are similar to the neck note guidelines, which give you in detail about the borders like cranial, caudal, anterior, posterior, lateral, and medial, and each one of that you can draw. I can give an example of one of them. So these are the DAS structures which, as you can see on the CT scan, and here you can see that this is a superior constrictor muscle, middle constrictor, inferior constrictor, including cricopharyngeus, esophageal inlet muscle, cervical esophagus. This is the base of the tongue, supraglottic larynx, and glottic larynx. So if to give you an example, this is a example of contouring for the superior pharyngeal constrictor, and the contouring starts superiorly at the lowermost section of the pterygoid plates, which is called as pterygoid hamulus, and this is the cranial extension. Anteriorly, it is bounded by the pharyngeal lumen. Posteriorly, it is bounded by the prevertebral muscles. Laterally, it is bounded by the medial pterygoid muscle, and inferiorly it is bounded by the C2. And similar to this, there are contouring guidelines for each of them, and this itself is a lecture in its is a lecture, a separate lecture, and therefore I don't think I'm going to go in the details. But all I can say is that in this article by Christian and et al., you can get the details of how contouring has to be done, and they have also shown slice by slice how the contouring has to be done for each of the structures such as supraglottic larynx or larynx and all the other DARS structures. So there have been various dosimetric studies, and they have evaluated different sets of DARS muscles, and these are unlike the present studies which typically use guidelines by Christian and et al. These studies have used some of the DARS muscles and not all of them. And but what they observed was that for development of any dysphagia related issue, the mean dose somewhere has to be more than 50 gray, and that is what we observed, that somewhere if you go more than 50 gray, then the problems of dysphagia become more. So we did this study, which we call as TMS DAS study, and it's a prospective single arm study, a small study as compared to the UK DAS trial, but nevertheless, it was done in histologically proven head neck squamous cell carcinomas. We considered patients who had oropharyngeal, hypopharyngeal, and laryngeal primary tumors, who were planned for radical intent concurrent chemoradiotherapy, and patients who had nasopharyngeal cancers, PNS tumors, T1, T2 larynx were excluded. Patients who were planned for neoadjuvant chemotherapy or were considered for re-radiation were excluded, and also patients who were planned for brachytherapy were excluded. So patients were planned for IGRT technique, and the contouring was more or less similar to that of the primary, was similar to that of the UK DARS trial. So we had drawn GTV primary, GTV node, and then CTV primary, CTV node high risk, for the positive nodes and low risk for the negative nodes. High risk PTV received 70 gray in 35 fractions and included CTV primary and CTV node high risk, while low risk PTV included PTV 56 in 30, was given PTV, was named as PTV 56 in 35, and it included all uninvolved node. So evaluations included pre-treatment modified barium swallow and evaluation with URTC QLQ, and post-treatment evaluation included modified barium swallow QA and QLQ at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. So how we did is slightly different than the UK DAS trial. Unlike them, they clubbed the constrictors directly. What we did was that we had drawn all individual DARS muscle as shown earlier also. So we had drawn all the individual DARS muscles. Then what we did was that all the DARS muscles were fused together to form a common structure called as DARS. Then what we did was that we fused the high risk PTV and low risk PTV to form a PTV total. So this one is the PTV total, and these pink ones are the DAR structures and the PTV total. And then we subtracted the DARs which were outside those PTV. So DAR structures minus the PTV structures form DARs minus PTV. So why this is important, I'll just explain to you in the next slide, is that we gave constraints to DARS minus PTV. So aim of the study was to achieve a mean dose of DARS of less than 50 gray. So while we made the attempt to achieve the doses to DARS structure to 50 gray, in some of the situation, it was not feasible. And in such situations, we had already pre-decided that we will accept DARS minus PTV dose of less than 50 gray. So, and the priorities were slightly different as compared to the UK DARS trial. Apart from main OARs of spinal cord and brainstem, our first priority was the target volume coverage to both the primary to the 70 gray volume as well as 56 gray volume. And then the priority was given to the DARS minus PTV and then rest of the OARs. Unlike UK DARS trial, which I will come to it later. And then we had formed our own constraints for DARS minus PTV, and these were formed taking into account that we would like to have the mean dose of less than 50 gray. So essentially what we wanted was that 100% of the volume should receive less than 20 gray, 70% of the volume should receive less than 30 gray, 50% of the volume should receive less than 40 gray, and 20% of the volume should receive less than 50 gray. And that's how we had made the constraint for DARS minus PTV. So mean age of presentation was 54 years, majority were male. And unlike DARS study, we had less of oropharyngeal cancer and more of laryngeal and hypopharyngeal cancer, which accounted for around 64%. Tumors were mainly T2, T3, and nodal status was mainly N0 and N1. We had not taken N3 nodes or bulky N2 nodes in our study because then it would have made difficult to spare the DAR structure. So in spite of that, the volumes were quite large. And if you look at the HRPTV main 1735 volume, it was almost 221 cc. If you look at the DARS volume, it was 65 cc, and DARS minus PTV volume was 40 cc. So the mean HRPTV D95 was 68, and the dose that we could achieve to the full DARS structure was 48 gray, while the dose to the DARS minus PTV was 34.5 gray. And then these are the individual doses to the various DARS structures which we were able to achieve. So these are the examples of our patient, and this is a patient with supraglottic primary. And here you can see that in this, we were able to spare the superior constrictors, base of the tongue and cervical esophagus, while this is the example of the tonsillar primary. And here you can see that we are not able to spare the base of the tongue and superior constrictor, while we are able to spare the inferior constrictor, cervical esophagus, and the supraglottic and laryngeal laryngeal constrictor muscles. So with different primaries, you are able to spare different sets of DARS muscles. And this is an axial scan where we are sparing only outside the target volume, and we are not compromising on the target volume coverage for sparing of DARS structure. So what we observed was that the main two constrictors were BOT and superior constrictor, which accounted for around 58% of the DARS volume. And because of that, in oropharyngeal cancers, these were compromised, and which led to a higher dose in oropharyngeal cancer. And we were not able to spare the full DARS structures below 50 gray, and the mean dose was 54 gray. While in larynx cancers or hypopharyngeal cancer, it was 44 gray. So mean DARS dose of less than 50 gray was possible in around 68% of the patient. So DARS mean dose of less than 50 gray, we were able to achieve only in 33% of the patient, and in 87% of the patient with laryngopharyngeal cancer. And larger the PTV, it was more difficult to spare the DARS structure, and the cutoff that we found was 250 cc. So the difference between the UK DAS trial and our trial is that what they did is that they compromised the CTV54 for the constrictors, while we did not compromise any of the target volume, and we spared the structures only outside the target volume. So we didn't want to compromise on the target volume coverage, and that may be one of the reasons that the DARS doses may be slightly higher as compared to that of the DARS trial. So then let us look at one of the case capsule, and this is a 59-year-old male who had a change in voice, and on CT scan he had a nodular thickening in the anterior two-third of the left false chord true vocal cord and with paraglottic extension. This is his modified barium swallow, and here you can see that the swallow is quite functional. There is nothing going inside the larynx. So he was diagnosed as CA vocal cord T3N0M0 and was considered for radical intent CTRT. He received DAS sparing IMRT for 70 gray in 35 fraction with concurrent cisplatinum. This is his IMRT plan, and this is a PET CT post radiotherapy. And here you can see his swallow post radiotherapy 1 year. And you can see that still it is a very good functional swallow. And this is what we aim to achieve with the help of DARS sparing IMRT. So which patient should we consider for DARS sparing IMRT? All patients who are being treated for radical intent CTRT may be considered. And we thought that we didn't take any N3 patients, and preferably N0 or N1 or small N2s may be considered, because as the nodes increase, the volume of PTV will increase, and that may compromise, because if your volume of PTV is higher, then it is very difficult to spare the DAS structures. And while majority of the studies have concentrated on oropharyngeal cancer, because in West, oropharyngeal cancers are more common, but sparing of DARS actually is better in laryngeal and hypopharyngeal cancer. And if you also look at the SEER data, aspiration is a main problem in laryngeal and hypopharyngeal cancer, and therefore it is important that we consider these patients for DARS optimized RT. Prasad, how are we doing? Should I stop, or I can take few slides?
Yeah, I think we have 3-4 minutes, Ashwini. No problem.
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
You can tell me when to stop, because my presentation is slightly longer. So you can tell me when to stop, okay?
Maybe we can stop in another 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So I think this is the study which Dr. Vide also alluded to, and this is one of the prospective studies. I don't think I will go into detail of that, but this study is a prospective study of DAS sparing IMRT, and what they found that there is a more than 10-point worsening in the quality of life scores in patients who receive RT, and therefore DORT is important. And This study also, this is another study which looked at DAS sparing IMRT, and what they found was that there is also pooling that is happening. So they used residue Farneti pooling score, and they observed that there was worsening in that score at 6 and 12 months. So there is residual pooling also happening in addition to penetration and aspiration. And also they found that the penetration and aspiration scores were higher in on follow-up in these patients. So what are the predictors of dysphagia? And this was a study which was done in oropharyngeal cancers. And what they found was that patients who had induction chemotherapy or patients who had advanced T3, T4 stage disease, they were at higher risk of developing dysphagia as well as aspiration. And then what they did was that they looked at various muscles. So not only the DAS muscle, they look at all individual muscles of the head and neck region, and they found the statistically significant correlation between the dysphagia, aspiration, and the doses to these muscles. And from that, what has been thought that it is not only the DAS muscle, but many other muscles that are important. And from that, this concept has come of functional swallowing units as the organs of risk. And soon we may have to implement that. And this talks about various muscles which are involved in the physiology of swallowing, which include hyolaryngeal elevation, tongue-based retraction, and tongue motion. And they talk about each of the muscle involved in the each of these three steps. And these are the muscles they feel that should be spared while doing IMRT, and they have given details of contouring of each of these muscles similar to that by Krishnanan et al. And they have also given atlas wherein each of these muscles is contoured. And maybe in future we may have to go for delineation of functional swallowing unit than just DARS muscles, and this will make life slightly more complicated than what it is with even DARS. So this is one of the aspect. And as brachytherapy is a very important part for me, I want to touch upon this, that whether brachytherapy can spare DAS. And we all know that brachytherapy is a very good technique wherein there is a very rapid fall off of the dose and results in excellent local control rates and functional and oncological outcome. And we all are aware of this low dose pill, which can have impact on various muscles, while with brachytherapy, you can have a very highly conformal dose distributions. So whether DARS can be spared with brachytherapy better than IMRT. And there was a study by Levendag et al., wherein they evaluated 81 patients who were treated with IMRT, of which 43 were treated with brachytherapy. And what they found that these are the patients' blue dots, which are with brachytherapy, and the others are with no brachytherapy. And they found that those who had brachytherapy had very less dysphagia. And in fact, this was the only significant factor on multivariate analysis. So brachytherapy is also one of the important ways to spare DARS than using fancy techniques, or maybe we can combine the two techniques to have much better outcome than only DOIMRT. So to summarize, dysphagia and aspiration are a major cause of concern post CTRT, and identification and proper contouring of DARS structure is important. We have to follow the guidelines. Sparing of DARS is now feasible, and we can do that with DARS optimized radiotherapy. And we do have now phase 3 evidence also, which supports that very strongly. Oropharyngeal cancer, it is slightly difficult to spare DARS because the bulk of the DARS lies in that area. It's DARS sparing is more feasible for laryngeal and hypopharyngeal primaries. And one of the other methods to spare DARS is brachytherapy also, and we should incorporate that also. And we need studies with long-term endpoints to see how it impacts on swallowing, as well as clinical outcomes such as recurrence rates by sparing these structures. So thank you. I do want to acknowledge my students whose topic, Adnan's thesis topic was this, and Abhishek is currently working on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashwini, for this wonderful presentation. in depth, basically telling us what exactly should we do in clinical practice. So we have a lot of questions coming in already, and I wanted to kick off by asking some questions which I sort of came up while both of you were presenting. Now, while we have very elegant definitions of aspiration and dysphagia, for somebody who's seeing, a large number of patients in clinics sitting in India, how do we quickly sort of, can you summarize what exactly do we mean by dysphagia? Is it just patients saying that, I cannot swallow, or are there some pointers that we can have where we identify, okay, this patient needs more time, I need to spend more time with him or assess him more? What are the pointers that you can suggest?
So I can start off by saying that it's like we've heard from Ashwini's presentation, it's a very complex process. It's not easy. And depending on where the primary is, the patient will already have some difficulty in swallowing, especially for laryngeal and hypopharyngeal cancer. And once we give them chemoradiation, we've just here touched upon the swallowing structures, whereas swallowing, there are components of taste to swallow, also lack of saliva can affect how moist the food bolus is. And if you have a really dry food bolus, it is impossible to, or very difficult to get it past the base of tongue into the pharynx. So it's a very complex picture, and it's extremely difficult to predict in advance when you see a patient in clinic and recommend treatment to tell them the likelihood of them developing dysphagia, because there are, like, if you look at the MDADI questionnaire and the quality of life questionnaires, there are several aspects like eating in public. So for people, say, who like going out with their family to eat, it takes them a long time to eat, which significantly affects their quality of life, to give you an example. So it's not a very simplistic answer to this question, because it's a complex process, and prediction at the moment is pretty much difficult. I mean, we can try and do it based on the site of the tumor and volume of disease, like Ashwini said.
Dr. Ashwini, any comments?
So, as I mentioned in the presentation also, each of the patient who is going for organ preservation should be evaluated by speech and swallowing therapist, but that may not be possible. So in clinic, what we can do is, if the patient himself is complaining of difficulty in swallowing, or we have to ask whether they are having cough while swallowing, or sometimes clearing the throat while swallowing, or change in voice after swallowing. So these are the indicators that they are having problems in swallowing. And the simple test which any clinician can do in the clinic is 100 ml water swallow test and observe yourself. So that will give you idea that if the water is going properly without any problem and patient is comfortable, then you may avoid further evaluation. But if patient is coughing, or there is drooling, or there is clearing of throat or something like that, then you can uh, uh, consider that this patient is going to have swallowing problems, and will need proper evaluation by swallowing therapist and uh, swallowing exercises to avoid further issues.
Thank you. When I commented on Shree's presentation, I said it's a very bold study because you see such a beautiful butterfly gap between your PTV. It's not something that we are used to seeing, and the I wanted to check with Shree the stage of the patients that you had in your study versus stage of the patients that was there in TMH study. How do we sort of correlate between them? Did you have more of early stage while TMH had more of advanced?
I think it's not about early stage. It was patient selection. So, like I said, if a patient had involvement in the retropharyngeal region, it would have been impossible to spare the constrictors safely. Or if there was any hint of involvement of the posterior pharyngeal wall, when the patient had a examination under anesthesia or a flexible nasoendoscopy prior to radiotherapy planning, these patients were excluded because although we think that it is probably safe to de-escalate dose to the elective nodal volumes, we don't have enough data as yet, even for HPV positive oropharyngeal cancers, to de-escalate dose to the high dose regions. And that's still, we wouldn't really recommend that. So now going forward, in terms of implementing this in clinical practice, again, we've made a decision to do this only for patients where we reasonably think that the superior constrictor is going to be adjacent to an elective nodal volume as opposed to a high dose or high risk volume.
So
So it is very selective. Yeah, sorry.
And I think in their study it was possible because majority of the patients were HPV positive. Whether we can do the same is a real question, and I think I will have concerns if I have to spare DAR structures over PTV, and that's the reason we adopted a different approach, which I showed in the presentation, because our patients are mainly HPV negative patients.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in Europe and Western Europe and America, most of our oropharyngeal cancer patients now are HPV positive.
Yeah.
Because of the considerable declining smoking habits. They are mainly HPV positive. And talking to the Americans, I was talking to Dr. Fuller at MD Anderson, and 95% of their patients are HPV positive now.
My God, okay.
That's a very different patient profile.
Completely different demographic.
That's
I
what.
agree.
So I'll start taking the audience questions now. Sominarayan has asked, what is the significance of DVH dose levels of constrictors in the event of weight loss induced by radiotherapy? And is, he's probably asking about adaptive radiotherapy.
I'll start off by what we do. I mean, now at present, our patients get a daily cone beam CT when they have IMRT. And this is assessed initially by a radiographer or a therapy radiographer. And if they have any concerns, the images are transferred to the physics department, where they do a kind of very crude calculation where they fuse the images with the planning scan and superimpose the original dose structures and dose volumes on the, and then the clinician assesses this. It is time consuming. And then we have to make an individual decision on whether this patient needs replanning. And again, the threshold, our criteria for replanning, which means reshell and rescan, is if there's a compromise in dose to the PTV, high risk PTV, or if there is an increased dose to either the brainstem or the spinal cord, which are absolutely very important. And in these patients, we repeat the planning process. So we are guided by cone beam CT on a weekly basis.
Ashwini, your experience on this?
I think we follow the similar protocol. We do evaluations with CBCT, and we match it with the planning scan and evaluate. Wherever there is a gross change, sometimes the PTV is going out of the skin, these kind of scenarios, or where the spinal cord dose is becoming higher, then only we are considering for replanning procedure, because it is very intense, especially taking into account if you are doing DOIMRT, then it's very intense. So the threshold is slightly higher to do replanning.
Yeah. In my practice, what I also do is, which is a little time consuming sometimes, is we check the patient's weight daily. You don't really need to check it daily, but we do it daily because just to create a little bit of pressure on patients that we are watching so that they maintain their nutrition. In India, nutrition is a real problem, and we record it. So there's a sort of a chart in their file, and that sort of sometimes helps, and it also guides us along with the daily CBCT, which we goes to. So the next question is from Dr. Punita Lal. What about, she's asking, what are the situations where you would not consider DOIMRT, and what about post-induction chemotherapy for extensive T4 lesions?
So can I say, from whatever my experience, I have come to the conclusion that patients who have larger neck nodes like N3 neck nodes, or patients who have larger tumor size, which may lead to PTV of more than 250 cc, you will not be able to spare DARs. So essentially T4 patients, I don't think you can really spare DARs. Even if you attempt to do so, it may not be technically feasible to spare DARs in such patients. And in post NACT scenario, I have not tried, and I am not very sure whether we can do it, because target volume delineation post NACT itself is a very dicey scenario, because if there is response to chemotherapy, then what is your actual target volume is a real question. And in such situation, to spare DARS, I am not very sure of doing that. So I won't consider such patients for doing DOIMRT.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And like I said, I mean, you can outline the DAR structures and undertake a planning process, but it's what you're prepared to
Hello?
compromise that is the key. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you,
Yeah.
Shri.
So that's the most important thing, is what are you prepared to compromise in order to spare the constructors? And if you're not prepared to compromise on your plan primary target volume, then there's no point in doing it.
So the next question is by Soumya again, and I think it's a very pertinent question because in both the presentations, what I also missed is the data on incidence of feeding tube. So what he's asking is, can we get rid of the PEG or RT feeding if we do DOIMRT? And what is the data that we have? Because this is a real problem for the patients. They're not able to eat, they're swallowing, and that has a significant impact on their quality of life as well.
So in our study, what we have done is that pre-treatment, those were having feeding tube were not considered for the study. So those patients who had pre-treatment swallowing evaluation, which was a functional swallow, were only considered for the study. And they were rigorously counseled, and they were given swallowing exercises, and counseling was done every week very intensely to avoid weight loss, and to check, we maintain notebooks for their nutrition so that there is no weight loss. And we somehow tried not to put peg tube, feeding tube for these patients. So that's how we manage this, because once the feeding tube is in, then further study evaluations would have become difficult. So we made a special attempt to avoid feeding tube wherever possible. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, patients who were deemed to require feeding tube prior to treatment weren't included. And in UK in general, at least at the Royal Marsden, we have a policy of reactive feeding. So we never, even in patients, unless they have significant aspiration or significant swallowing that's affected, we follow a reactive feeding approach. Because, and again, it depends on what resources you have. And the reason we do that is because we're able to get in a feeding tube if required during treatment very quickly. So.
Yeah.
They are assessed weekly by a speech therapist at the Marsden and a dietitian. And if there is, we have a kind of red light procedure. So if the speech therapist or the dietitian red lights the patient, we immediately admit them and put a feeding tube in, be it NG tube or a PEG tube.
And we also have data that if you put in a tube early, then the chances of dependency are in these patients also higher. So we also do the reactive feeding tube in these patients. So Abhilash has asked a very interesting question, which is very pertinent to Indian context, that not many hospitals, as Ashwini, you mentioned, don't have a speech therapist. So if you don't have a speech therapist along with you, then how do you assess dysfunctional larynx?
So the simplest test I mentioned is the 100 ml water swallow test. It is a really simple method to check whether patient has any gross problems. It may not be able to detect finer problems like you can do it on fees, but any gross problems you will be able to come to know by 100 ml water swallow test. So wherever a speech swallowing pathologist is not available, clinicians can go for 100 ml water swallow test and evaluate the patient, and then take a call on what they want to do further.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even in the DAR study, we haven't analyzed the data, but we have used a 100 ml swallow test. And just to make it pertinent to the real life situations, these were not administered by a speech therapist. They were administered by a nurse or a therapy radiographer in clinic. And we have measured those. So I think we should be able to present that data when that's analyzed. It's not been analyzed yet.
So COVID has done interesting things to our practice. And in my practice, we used to do speech therapy appointments every week for our patients, and fees and all the various protocols. Because of COVID, we are obviously not able to do it. We are not doing any fees for our patients anymore. But what we have started doing is we have taken our entire rehab practice online. So our patients get diet review, they get speech therapy appointments, they get physiotherapy, yoga, as well as counseling, and everything is moved online. And we do group sessions as well as individual sessions. So if you don't have a speech therapist available in your particular center, maybe you could tie up with somebody who's outside, maybe in completely different city, and do a video consultations for your patients. So at least some basic help could be that person will also become a point of contact for raising a red flag that there is something of a problem. So if you don't have it physically, maybe we could do it virtually, and I think it would be quite interesting to look at. Um, the next question is on constraints. That should DARS constraints be given priority over parotid constraints? And I want to add one more part to it, that within the DARS structures, if you have a choice between selecting one over the other, how do you prioritize between the DARS structures? Is there a hierarchy that you would follow in these structures?
So for the purpose of the study, we have given priority for DAS over parotid, but in routine clinical practice, whether DAS should get priority over parotids or not, that is a question very difficult to answer right now for me. Maybe Dr. Bidi can answer that. Another thing, what you asked, I forgot completely.
Between the various DARS structures?
Yeah, so what I can say is that the superior constrictors and base of the tongue, they are the bulkiest DARs and they contribute to the largest volume and also very important structures in propelling the food down. So they are very important. So attempt should be made to spare those first over others if possible. But if it is a oropharyngeal and relatively largest primary, then sparing them is really challenging.
Yeah, I agree it's difficult to answer whether you spare the parotids or the DAR structures, because I think what we are trying to do here is maintain patient quality of life. And if you read the studies that have reported on serial quality of life measurements, it's been impossible to separate xerostomia and dysphagia in the patient-reported outcomes as to what affects their quality of life the most. So again, that's a very difficult question to answer. In terms of hierarchy, I agree. I mean, superior constrictor seems to be the most important based on the publications that you see up to date, up till now.
The other interesting thing is the xerostomia also impacts dysphagia, that if the patient has severe xerostomia, the patient is more likely to have more difficulty in swallowing. So they're sort of interlinked. Dr. Patni has a comment on Ashwini's talk, where she has said that do IMRT is dysphagia optimized IMRT is more relevant in hypopharyngeal and laryngeal cancers, but of course brachytherapy is not possible in those sections. I completely agree. Nitin has asked, do we have any PRV for DARS? We are really struggling with DARS and adding a PRV. Very pertinent question, Nitin, but it will make our life really so much more difficult.
I don't think we have given or anyone has given in the literature, whatever I have read, I don't think so anyone has given PRV for DARS. Whether we should give, that is a question. Maybe Nitin More himself can do study at his center and answer that question.
Yeah, that's going to be one difficult study. So other question Nitin has is epiglottis part of the DARS, and many times we see that actually the atrophy of the epiglottis becomes a major issue and the patient has aspiration because of that. So can we use higher constraints for epiglottis?
Yes, epiglottis is a part of DARS, and as of now we are struggling to draw DARS and give constraints. So we have not reached to the point that we will come to individual DARS and individual doses requirement. Maybe in future we will come at that point, and this is the important point and can be studied further.
And the next one, Nitin has asked, will it be beneficial to use DARS for two contiguous subsites like oropharynx and hypopharynx or larynx? So I suppose what he means is that if you have a tumor which is sort of going on to multiple subsites rather than one subsite, so very large volume tumor.
The answer is probably not, I think, because again, you have to give priority to tumor response rather than swallowing after treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Amol, who also happens to be my colleague, has asked, when do we objectively consider doing NG insertion, and how patients are counseled for continued swallowing exercises after NG insertion?
So again, our criteria, I mean, we prefer NG tube over a PEG or a RIG tube. And again, there is some data to suggest that recovery to a normal swallow is quicker with an NG tube. And I mean, our criteria we use, I mean, these are approximate criteria, is if the patients have experienced a more than 10% weight loss during treatment from the baseline weight, and if there is obvious aspiration. So, and our patients are intensively counseled right from day one, which might not be possible in every center. It's a resource problem as well, because there are a few centers in the UK where they cannot get tubes in speedily, in which case they do still follow a prophylactic feeding tube approach. So if you're not able to get a tube in quickly, you should still consider a prophylactic approach. It depends on what your practice is like, I think.
I think it's a very good idea to be aware of what are the resources we have and we don't have, and then shape our practice accordingly. Dr. Kano, whom all of us know for his wonderful cartoons telling us about various aspects of radiotherapy, and he's really taking it forward to a different level when it comes to education. Thanks, Kano, for that. He's asking, should we ask for a barium swallow in every follow-up?
So barium swallow is not recommended because it is a static swallow. It's not a functional swallow. It doesn't evaluate the flow of the material that goes inside. You will be able to know whether there is stricture, but it will not be useful for evaluation of the functioning properly. That's why you have to use modified barium swallow and not barium swallow. Although it may give you idea about stricture, but it may not be useful for functional evaluation.
So next question is from Dr. Sarthak. He's asking, how do we spare DARS in a case if we are treating a nasopharyngeal carcinoma? So is it possible, and which ones do we prioritize? Shreed, any comments?
On the nodal status, you might be able to, or the stage T stage, you might be able to spare the middle constrictor and a portion of the inferior constrictor and base of tongue, but it will be really difficult to spare the superior constrictor, in my opinion, for patients with nasopharyngeal cancer.
Yeah.
Soumya is asking, what is the impact of auto shift apply in CBCT on daily basis and dose to constrictor? So do we have a study which looks at, because every time you shift, there's going to be a little bit of dose inhomogeneity that is being created. Is there do we have some data on impact of that?
Not really, because if you look at these constrictors, I mean, the slides we've shown have been magnified several times, and you can see the constrictor very clearly. So sitting down to outline these constrictors on a CT scan, you can't actually see the muscle. What you're outlining is where you think the muscle is, which is based on the previous anatomical studies and the guidelines. So, I mean, the quality of CBCT images, as we all know, are inferior to our planning CT images. So it will be very difficult to do such a study. And I mean, people who use tomotherapy might be able to do it because of better image quality, or the MR Linac, if anyone has got that, and they can use a daily MR guidance. We will see studies looking at this.
Dr. Sharbani, I'm so glad Dr. Sharbani is also attending this, because I know that she was going to be busy in other webinar, and thank you, Dr. Sharbani, for being there. She's asking, what do we do if there's an NG tube already in situ? How do we deal with this? Ashwini, any Indian?
We, in our study, didn't take patients who had NGT in situ for DAR sparing. So we have taken patients who had functional swallow. So NGT patients were excluded from the study.
Yeah. So Kanu has asked a question about planning technique, and I was also sort of very curious about what exactly are the planning techniques that you have used. So he has asked, how difficult is it to adapt to this planning techniques? And I want to add between both the studies, did you do, both of you use IMRT or you use VMAT as well in these patients? And what is your view on choosing between VMAT and IMRT?
We use VMAT also.
Ashwini, we're not able to hear you right now. Shri, do you want to go till then, till Ashwini comes back?
So most of our patients, I mean, when we started off the study, we hadn't mandated whether it was going to be VMAT or IMRT. It was just dysphagia optimized IMRT. But the last few years, sorry,
there is nothing to choose for VMAT or IMRT.
Ashwini, oh, glad you're back. We couldn't hear much what you said. Sorry, could you please repeat that? You're on mute, Ashwini. 1 minute, I'll just unmute you. Just a minute.
But where am I? I'm not able to.
We can see you now and hear you.
Okay.
So between VMAT and IMRT.
We have used VMAT as well as we have used IMRT, and it was essentially based on the availability of machine in our scenario, and no specific thing as when to use VMAT or when to use IMRT. Both are fine. I mean, yeah.
But do you see there is a difference between the dose achieved for DARS between these two structures?
I have not done any comparative study of that, so won't be able to comment on this. Maybe Dr. Bide can comment.
Yeah, I don't think there is much difference in terms of the end plan that you get. But in terms of the planning time, for people who do the planning, VMAT is quicker at achieving these constraints. IMRT, in our experience, that is at our center, it takes longer for the staff who do the planning to achieve the dose constraints. But in the end, they do manage to do this. And one important thing to say is, I mean, with this trial, most of the UK centers undertook a rigorous quality assurance program, which included in silico planning exercises, which gave a lot of experience to the planners and the clinicians as well in target delineation, patient selection. And every center was individually approved by the central RTQA committee for trial. And this is the norm for every radiotherapy trial in the UK now, not just head and neck cancer. Any clinical trial that involves radiation planning, you have to have a rigorous QA process. And before you start using any new technique, I think it's very important to do some in silico planning studies based on the scans and patients you've treated in the past, which gives you a bit of experience in at least the planning process and delineation process. And I would strongly recommend that to anyone who's starting new.
Thanks. So the next question is from an anonymous attendee. They are asking that is DARS a serial or a parallel unit? And so sparing the part outside PTV, but giving the dose to the part of DARS in the region of PTV, would it help as a whole if it is a serial structure? So that's a very interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And it's muscle. So basically these are group of muscle. It's not one structure, and this is a new structure. So everyone is attempting whatever is possible by sparing the part outside the PTV. Sometimes you are able to spare one set of muscle completely, and sometimes you are able to spare part of the same muscle outside that PTV. So if it is a separate set of muscle, then its functioning should not get affected at all by not sparing the part within the PTV and sparing the other part. But whether sparing the part of the muscle which is outside the PTV of the same muscle will affect that muscle's functioning or not is a subject to be studied, actually, because it will depend on the nerve supply that traverses through the muscle and all those things. So I don't have a clear answer for that particular part of the study.
No, I agree. And it's complex because, like you said, these muscles are supplied by the pharyngeal plexus of nerves that are very closely attached to the muscles. So when you're outlining the muscles, you do include these nerves as well, and they do get a radiation dose. And nerves, as we know, are classed as serial organs, whereas other structures are parallel. So it's a difficult thing to answer really, because there's a complex interplay between the nerve function and the muscular function really.
So Dr. Ghosh has made a very interesting comment that if you restrict the use of feeding tubes in DAS optimized IMRT, we are actually reducing the generalization of the study. And I guess as you both of you have already spoken, that maybe once we have some more clarity data, we will probably use it in those patients as well. Dr. Manish Siddha from Jupiter has asked, can we do this in post-operative patients as well?
You could do it. They weren't included in our study, but I think in the UK for oropharyngeal cancer, we're running the PATHOS study, so which is de-escalating radiation treatment after transoral surgery for oropharyngeal cancers. And again, this study has primary endpoints of swallowing function. So we should have the results of this study would then guide us on whether we can use it for post-operative patients. I mean, there's no reason saying you cannot, but again, because the anatomy has altered after an operation, you need to be careful about what you're sparing and how you spare it.
So Pushkar, Dr. Pushkar Ringre, who happens to be a dear friend and my batchmate from TMH, has asked a question about nimotuzumab. So he's asking Dr. Ashwini, what is your opinion on patients with T3N0 or N1 patients who are on concomitant nimotuzumab? And nimotuzumab increases mucositis, so that can cause higher dysphagia. So will you consider DOIMRT for them?
As long as they have functional swallow to begin with, I think we can consider DOIMRT if they are on nimotuzumab. I think we should consider.
Shri, do you use nimotuzumab in your practice?
No, and even cetuximab, following a lot of the studies, no one really uses an EGFR inhibitor in a radical setting these days in the UK.
Okay. So Dr. Naveen has asked, what is the contribution of dose from the cervical lymph nodes to DARS?
What is that? There will be contribution. I mean,
yeah, I guess.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and Dr. Sanjeet has asked something which Shri, I think you have alluded in your presentation, but you could speak a little bit more in detail about that, because that's the main concern that many of us have, is that if we do DARS optimized IMRT, is there a difference in recurrences?
In the DARS study, we had 50 patients in each arm, so it wasn't really powered to come to a conclusive evidence or give a conclusive answer on whether the recurrences are reduced. So the concern with the DARS study would be recurrence in the area of underdosage. So these areas on an average are getting between 40 and 49 gray in 30 fractions at between 1.4 to 1.6 gray per fraction. And now there have been some studies, and there is a randomized study from the Belgian group in Leuven, where they randomized patients between 50 gray and 50 gray equivalent to elective nodal volumes versus 40 gray. And they did not find any difference between the recurrence rate. And there are some single center experiences that have been published from North America, where they've now started de-escalating doses to lymph nodes in HPV positive patients. And they have demonstrated that by de-escalating doses to the elective volumes in that range, 40 to 45 gray, in HPV positive patients, I must stress, hasn't had any detriment on recurrence rate in the elective nodal volumes. So you have to be very careful. So even in the DARS study, we only accepted compromise in the elective nodal volume, not in the high dose region.
Yeah, thank you. So Dr. Indu Bansal has made a comment that in post-op patients, the volumes will be larger. So I guess doing DARS would be even more difficult. So that brings us to end of the question and answer sessions from the audience. I just wanted to invite both of you to make any comments if you have any specific take-home messages for our attendees. Shri, do you want to just give us a little take home for what's your one line take home from today?
Well, patient selection. That's what I would say. If you want a one line, patient selection and target volume delineation is the most important thing. So even with delineating the primary, we've used an MRI because we believe that CT scan, the primary is open to interpretation. So that's what I would say, patient selection and target volume delineation.
Dr. Ashwini, any Indian perspective comment for
I
our
think,
colleague?
what I would like to say is that in India, we do not have that much, we don't do swallowing evaluation so much, and there is not much awareness about this, and also about dysphagia aspiration post radiotherapy. So we do not look for all these symptoms even when patients come for follow-up. So we have to slightly go ahead and start swallowing evaluations pre-radiotherapy and rigorous counseling post during radiation, and also during follow-up we have to look for these symptoms of dysphagia and aspiration, because many patients develop this aspiration and they go to different clinics and do not come to oncology clinics on follow-up, and they die of aspiration, which we never come to know also. So I think that it's high time that we look into all this and develop a rigorous mechanism for finding out these problems, and also try to spare dysphagia related structure as much as possible in our clinical practice to avoid this kind of symptoms. That's what I think we should do in Indian scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I totally agree that we need to change our clinical practice in terms of how we look at our patients, and I feel there's a certain degree of radiation diya hai to jal to jayega type mentality that we have, and we need to move on from saying that no, even when we have given radiation, we should try and restore them back to where they came from, or even sometimes even better. So a completely change of perspective, I think we need to have here. So we are at the end of the session here. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhire and Dr. Ashwini Pudrukar, for joining us, sparing your important time. And I know Dr. Ashwini has another webinar coming up in just few minutes, and she's looking already anxious about joining that webinar. So we'll not keep everyone on hold. Thank you very much for the participants who joined. I'll be sharing some of the resources that the speakers have mentioned also in an email in next few days. And thank you very much for joining.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much for the invitation to join this webinar.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you
It
very
was a
much.
good discussion.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.